Welcome everybody. Glad you're here on this cold day, depending where you are. Today we're really lucky. We have Jeremy Rowe, who wrote this book. I'm going to hold it up. That about Arizona postcards that I bought. By the way, if you want to buy it, it's on Amazon, but you can't buy it on Amazon. You have to buy it directly from the publisher. But if you do a search, you can find it.
Mhm.
But it's a very good book, which I got, and I've been reading it. And the beginning of it, or the first part of it, is kind of about postcards in general before he gets to the part about the Arizona postcards. And it's really well written, and it's a lot of postcard books talk about kind of the history and that, but I've never read one that's quite written quite as nicely as this one. So
Thank
it's
you.
really good. So I want to let people know that it's a good book to get. Jeremy has a career involving researching and collecting photography, which includes postcards. He uh, he lives on in he splits his
Yes.
time between Arizona and I guess New York State somewhere. Where are you on the East Coast?
New York City.
New York
I was
City,
working at NYU for a period
NY,
of time.
not NYU. But anyway, he tonight he happens to be in Arizona, so he was smart. It's warm there. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy. Jeremy, if there's anything you want to add about your background, your experience, feel free
Sure,
to go ahead.
not a problem. I started collecting in grad school. I've been an academic. My day job had nothing to do with photography. This has always been what I've done on the outside for fun and as a passion. But I collect postcards in general. The key part of my collection is Arizona material, Arizona photo postcards. Primarily, golden era up to 1920 is my major focus. I thought I'd pick a couple of categories and just sort of give you a sort of a petting zoo tour. A little bit on photography in Arizona, a little bit on the mail, images of the mail, mining, towns, fires and disasters, sort of technology, since Arizona was an area that did a lot of technology testing between 1900 and 1920. Early aviation is one of those technologies, automobile racing and automobiles in the area. The Mexican border was a major activity from mid-aughts into the teens before World War One. A little bit of social history and something on tourism. So just wanted to do something with an organizer for you. I'm just going to step through and give a little bit of background in each of the photos and each of the postcards, and we'll go from there. I collect very broadly from daguerreotypes through ambrotypes, tintypes, stereos, cabinets, boudoirs, albums, all the way up to real photo postcards. This is an example of a tintype I thought I'd share with you. It's an outdoor tintype of a military band in Arizona. Very, very unusual. There are very, very few of these around. Not much photography was done until the postcard era when things really started exploding. I also collect stereo very heavily. This is a stereo view by Dudley Flanders, who came to Arizona from California in 1874 and made images. This is a portrait of his wagon with his dark tent and his photographic gear that he used to make the images as he was traveling. Example of a postcard rack in early Phoenix. This is a Phoenix drug company about 1907. You can see the big souvenir postcard sign on the back and the rotating racks on the tabletop there. Interesting area for showing a little bit of example of some of the postcard traffic here. I thought it'd be helpful to give you just a brief background using some numbers, just a snapshot of numbers. But if you look at the average, about 9 postcards per person, which is a number that's sort of bounces around, that people recommend that there's an average of about 9 postcards sent per person in 1910. You look at the population of the United States, population of New York, and population of Arizona, it looks like there's, we're a very, very small percentage. We're about 0.22% of the population. If you look at New York, 9.9%. Roughing it out, there's an average of maybe 450 to 1 for each of the postcards sent from Arizona compared to of other places compared to Arizona. Just a way to give you a feel for how rare and unusual real photo postcard, or actually postcards from Arizona are. Real photo postcards and better real photo postcards are even tougher. This is a mining community, Jerome, Arizona, north central Arizona. One of the soda shops with a postcard rack, just to give an idea of, again, how postcards were sold. I'd love to fill the rack with, find a rack like that and fill it with images from these photos and try and replicate that if I have a chance. Talking about photography, this is one of the traveling photography studios. If you look at the tent, you can see on the edge of the tent here, they've got a display of photographs. These are traveling photographers. Many of the studios had either a brick and mortar or a formal studio, but they also would have these traveling studios. In this case, the borough is carrying lumber the way that they carried lumber to many of the areas in the hilly parts of the state for developing the mines. And photographer couldn't fit it in the side of the tent, so he photographed outside. These are a group of photographers. If you look at the cameras, there's a couple of Kodak reflex cameras and Graflex reflex cameras in the shot. These are reporters that stopped for water along the Mexican border. They would travel from Texas across New Mexico and Arizona making photos. I'm not sure, I haven't identified these, but people like Horn and others that were doing photography, they would have these water stops as they're going back and forth to be able to fill up both for the cars and for the people. As you can see, it's pretty arid and pretty dry. This is a photography studio by Risden, O.C. Risden in Clifton, Arizona, in the far southeastern corner of the state. And the towns grew up very quickly. You can see the railroad track right up front of his door, his steps going down to the house. It's really packed in there. It says, Risden Studio across the top, and that's O.C. Risden, and then posed with his hand on his hip there, about 1910. This is kind of a fun one. This is the Gem Studio in Douglas, Arizona, also in the southeastern corner of the state. If you look carefully, the gem in the window above Photo Studio is written with India ink, the way they would label many other photo postcards, the same way they labeled the gem in white letters across the bottom. So apparently he didn't have a sign painted as yet. I've not found any other Gem Studio images that are labeled as being taken by them, but thought that was kind of a cool shot. And you can see the size of the studio, no skylights, no anything else, just sort of in a normal business block, which seems fairly unusual. This is an example of one of the photo montages that was done. This is the Douglas Calumet Mining Band. So these are all the workers in the mine that played instruments, and they would do the band. They shot them individually as postcards and then did an array of the postcards. This is taken by the Douglas Studios. This one's one of my favorites. I'll show you several favorites here, but this one is an example of a proposed bridge. So they actually have the bridge between the two parts from California and Arizona at Yuma, which is in the southwestern corner of the state. They have the ferry boat in the bottom that's going back and forth, and somebody used India ink to draw the bridge that was proposed to be put over the top of the river during that area. So sort of an interesting sales tool that they were using to try and sell the idea of the bridge. Obviously, as just a open sketch, but the bridge actually was built in this location later. This is a main street, pretty typical of a Western main street. There's a billiard parlor at the end, a Ray Hotel, and others. One of my all-time favorites is the next one, which is something that the photographer did, which I find fairly unusual. He wound up doing a double print. So it's a double print of the image, and really abstract, really unusual. I've not seen many images like this done during this time period from any other photographer. It seems like it's something beyond just a fluke because of the way it's composed and everything seems to fit very well. Unfortunately, I don't know who the photographer is that did that. For the folks that like the photo montages, this is a young photographer, Robert Turnbull, a Hispanic photographer in Arizona. And he did this composite of himself with a Kodak movie camera holding on the top of his top hat. So there are a few like this. They used a lot of the sort of packaged fantasy shots and just put Arizona on them, but this one's actually shot in Arizona by an Arizona photographer. Another photo related, this is Fatty Arbuckle, Roscoe Arbuckle, who traveled to Arizona and entertained the troops during the Mexican Border War. Someone had a Kodak autographic camera, which is the 3A camera, which has a little trapdoor on the back that you could write on the film with carbon, and then when you processed it, it made the caption or the signature, in this case, white. So this is Fatty Arbuckle. This is number 4407. I've been able to find 3 of these. Here's 4412, which is another shot from that same sequence. Love to find more. If anybody knows where there are any others, I'd love to find a way to fill out the numbers. I'm a number sequence person. I like to fill in the blanks and get the numbers together and find out how many were done in a certain sequence and see what the relationship is between the photographers as they work their way through. This one is in Tombstone, Arizona, southeastern corner of the state. This is actually Camillus Fly's studio, C.S. Fly's studio in Tombstone burning. And it His wife, Mary Fly, Molly Fly, was still operating the studio at this point. She apparently grabbed a camera, ran out, and shot a picture of the studio burning. There's three shots in sequence. One, this one's the most dynamic, and then the other is just the residue of the building as it's burned down. This is a photographer, Ben Cooley. I've got a lot of his material. He photographed very heavily in Arizona, also in California. He worked in the drugstore and sold Kodak equipment and then got hooked on photography. A little bit larger than a typical postcard camera. It's got a expansion bellows in the back and a larger image in the back, but I'll show you some other images by Cooley a little bit later as we work our way through. Another Arizona photo studio. This is the Castle Rock studio in Bisbee, showing it does get cold in Arizona as well, even though it's not where I am right now. This one's one that triggered an article series that I'm working on now. This is the Arizona Souvenir Picture Company and Post Office in Roosevelt, Arizona. The town was there from about 1903 to about 1912, 14 in this area. It sort of petered out at the end. It was built for the construction of the Roosevelt Dam, and they had 3 stagecoaches that went from Roosevelt to Payson, Globe, and Mesa, Arizona. And I find it fascinating and have spent a little bit of time with the postal history on this. I also have a card. It took me about 12 years to get this from the person that had it, but this is a same shot of the same building, has the post office sign there, but it's got all 3 of the stagecoaches identified. So you can match those with other images and tell which stagecoach you're finding if you are lucky to find any more images from this area. Another postal related, this is the interior of the Glendale, Arizona. It's Phoenix, suburb of Phoenix. 1907, this is the postmaster or the postal employee anyway, sort of lounging in the back with his bottle of hooch on the tip of his, looks like a Morris chair with all of the post boxes and so on in the back as he's sorting mail. Another mail variation showing a similar trend towards alcoholic consumption by male people. This is the mailman for Morenci, Arizona, very, very hilly. So you couldn't take a wagon or carriage. You had to go by mule and horse. So he's loaded his packages up. He's got everything ready to go. He's sitting on the front again with looks like a fifth of whiskey on his hip as he's ready to go. I found about 5 shots in a sequence of him delivering mail in different areas, and it's kind of a fun group. Another one shows the sort of volume of mail that's going on. This is Ganado on the Indian Reservation up in northeastern Arizona. These are the mail bags that they're delivering for Christmas out of the post office at Ganado. So Model T, and you can see the frame is actually not capable of carrying quite that load. You can see the tires are skewed and the frame is having some issues as well. Another mail-related image. This is the Arizona Territorial Prison and doing mail distribution to the prisoners. It's fascinating to look at the ethnography and the ethnographic background of the individuals that are there, and all either African-American or Hispanic. The only Anglo is the person giving out the mail, which says a bit about the incarceration at the time. On to mining. This is an underground shot. Miners at work with a pneumatic drill, just sort of a nice dynamic shot. This would be done with magnesium flash underground, which is relatively dangerous if there's any gas or other leaks in the town, but a number of these were done. This one's another mining related. There's a drilling activity going on. I'll show you detail in just a second. Right here, this is a single jack mining where they would have a large block of stone. They would have someone using a sledgehammer and a single drill, and they would hammer and hammer and have a race to see who could go within a certain amount of time deep enough. Okay, another underground shot. This is another magnesium lit shot. This is 1,100 feet underground in Miami, Arizona, which is in the center of the state. They would take young mules down and leave them. They would live the entire life down in the bottom of the mine because it was too difficult to get them back out. So they would just do nothing but carry, in this case, copper ore back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is about 1910. Sorry, my sequence was out. This shows the detail of the miners, the double jack or single jack miner in this case doing the mining. This is the Apache Powder Company in Benson. This is a company that made the blasting powder for the mines. They serviced the Southwest in general, but an example of the mines suppliers for the mines and the kind of things that had to be done at that level. You can see how far apart the buildings are in case one of them had a problem during the manufacturing. Try and not have the whole place go up at once. This is an interior of the Copper Creek mine. I've been out there once. It's about a 5-hour four-wheel trip back from a current area. This is a coreless mine machine room that they were using. They had to haul all of this stuff overland in horse and buggy wagons to be able to get to the mine. They actually brought a small locomotive on wagons about almost 40 miles to operate in this place for just a short stretch. I've got a whole series of images on the Copper Creek area that's kind of fun. This is a famous individual, Buffalo Bill Cody, who was having problems funding his Wild West show, so he decided to come out west and invest in gold mines. This is him coming to Yuma, Arizona, October 18th, 1908, to visit some of the mines that he had. Campo Bonito is one of the major mines that was there. He sort of went back and forth. He infused some of the money from his Wild West show in the mines, trying to get the mines to be able to have enough money to be able to help him with the Wild West shows, but the mining was not very successful there. Here's Cody with his two partners. You can see Captain Burgess on the right and Cody on the left with very similar goatees as they're working their way through. But Dyer was the one of the other partners in the mine at Campo Bonito at the time. We also had oil during this time, 1915, about roughly the same era that the Oklahoma and Texas mining, oil drilling was going on. They were doing oil drilling in Arizona, not productive enough to be able to make a major industry out of it, but still part of the story. This is Bisbee again, down in the southeastern corner. They had fairly widespread between the suburbs, the mines, and it was very difficult to get the miners back and forth quickly. So eventually they put in place 5 of these trolley cars that made trolley car routes, which would take the miners to the mine. This is the opening day with the cars decorated on the route between Bisbee, Warren, and Lowell, which are the 3 towns down there. Another typical Arizona town going up very quickly. This is Miami, Arizona, again. They've got a bandstand going on there. Very, very sparse town. What would happen is they would find a mine would be successful, or they would find a way to invest in a mine and they needed people there. They would have an auction and sell off lots and property. You would be able to either buy a building or bring a building, bring a tent, put the town up. So they tended to grow very, very quickly from these auctions and this sort of band play here. Don't know the date for sure for the auction around this, but it looks like it's probably in place to draw people here, entertainment and so on, so they could then auction off some of the other property in the area. Another favorite, this is by a photographer, N.E. Johnson. I looked for him for about 3 or 4 years before I found out he was called Ned Johnson, Northeast Johnson, but his real name is Ned. And he did just amazing work in Nevada and Arizona. This is one of the shots he did of a trading post, of Lou's trading post and Lou Grossman. And they brought a bunch of the props out. If you look in the corner, they've got somebody with a pistol pointing at the camera. You've got a policeman with a pistol getting ready to cold cock this guy. We've got Alfred E. Newman. We've got Lou Grossman here. We've got listings of all of the supplies, Kodak supplies in the corner. Just a really fascinating image. Here's another. This one may or may not be an image by Johnson, but it's another image of Oatman, the sign painting company. I love the reversed S on the back of the sign. But these places would go very, very quickly and very busy. Business like the sign company would pop up for a period of time, make the signs, and move on to the next growing town. Oatman was a very successful gold mining town up in the northwestern portion of the state. Here's another one. This one's kind of fun with the misspelled saloon, Casa Grande, about partway between Phoenix and Tucson in the center of the state. But another great photographer. This is by Calvin C. Osborne, who did a lot of Mexican border work. He also photographed in California during the earthquake. This is Cottonwood, Arizona, the center of the state, showing a typical transitory house. If you bought a property, you could buy a pallet. In some cases, they had these ready to go, and they put them on a wagon. You bought the property, and they just dropped the wagon. Wagon would come over and drop your house in place. Wooden bottom, canvas top. This one actually has a wooden roof that they put on it to try and protect it. The object on the side here is what's called an Arizona ice box. This is a 5-gallon, like a 5-gallon tin, oil tin, butter tin, something along that line. They would punch a couple of small holes across the bottom and fill it with water, and it would drip water under the burlap. the burlap would be wet. And as the breeze came by, it would cool it. So it would give a way to cool things in the area. And you can see, the broom and the women trying to keep a dust-free, clean environment inside is going to be pretty tough. But another sort of example of life in Arizona during that time period. Back to Tombstone. This is an image that I bought a number of years ago, and then I was at Adamstown 2 shows ago and was going through a box, and I found a second from this sequence. This is Prince. He was the mascot for the Tombstone Prospector, and when he died, they claimed that one of their competitors, either the Epitaph or one of the others, poisoned their mascot. So they've got a whole series of articles claiming this poor dog was poisoned. But these are all of the big names in Tucson at the time: the lawyers, the mayor, operator of the press, and so on. So these are the first two of Prince lying in state, and then this is the one of Prince in repose as they're getting ready to bury him. Their local Arizona brewery labels on the bottles, and he goes from having a cloth over him to now he's laying on a copy of the newspaper from their publishing company. On to sort of disasters and things at that level. This is done in Bisbee again. Bisbee was a very hilly town, and one of the creeks they just covered over with literally railroad ties and put earth on top and didn't do anything in the way of engineering for when it flooded. When it flooded, in this case, all of the ties came down and formed a dam, and the water filled up. This is the second floor of the library, with floodwater coming from the second floor of the library through the building, pouring down on the people. So you can see the water here. So there's in essence a dam on the other side of this building full of water, and it's spilling off into the main street. There's a post office down below. One of the few buildings in this presentation that are still extant. Also, near Bisbee, this is an example of what happens when the floods come through with the railway and the trolley lines. This one's back to Miami, an example of what happens when the washes flood. This poor car got stuck in the middle and all the residue came around it, so it's almost buried in the residue there. This has never been fixed. It was flooding even 2 years ago. They had similar floods with cars being stuck in the floods. Fires, another example. This is a little bit later, but during most of this time period, the buildings were made out of wood. People used wood stoves, kerosene lamps, and others, and there were very dramatic, very drastic fires all the way through. This one's kind of unusual because it's a brick building, but I thought just this image, I loved it. This is an example of what Bisbee, the towns you've seen a little bit before, looked like after the fire in 1906 or 1908. And literally they just decimate the town, and then 2 years later they had a fire in 06, another fire in 08, another fire a couple of years ago. After that, it's just an incredible devastation down there from fires on a pretty regular basis. This is Phoenix, central part of the state. This is the Adams Hotel, which was one of the main highlight hotels in the town, and they built it with a wooden cupola in the front that acted like a flue when it caught fire, and so the entire building went up very quickly. Here's the example of the tower that acted as a flue and took out the building very quickly. It's been rebuilt twice now. It's still the Adams Hotel, but just some beautiful images, and unfortunately photographers are not known. Sticking around Phoenix, this is an aviation meet. This is the fair with an early balloon. A little bit later, 1911. Phoenix had the second aviation meet in the country. The first was in Dominguez Hills in January 1910. In February 1910, Arizona had an aviation meet that was supposed to have a number of major aircraft there, but unfortunately, legal action between Curtis and the Wright brothers pulled everybody away. This is one of the, again, the balloon baskets where they would sell advertising, and they did postcards. So you could have a postcard made of yourself in the advertising, with the advertising for the location. This is one of the planes that was at Phoenix for the aviation meet in 1910. They had Hamilton and Willard were the two pilots. They were both pilots for Curtis. None of the other planes were able to come, so only Curtis sent 2 planes to Phoenix for the meet. They made postcards in California and planned on people coming there. So you find postcards of Glenn Curtis in his airplane with Phoenix on the bottom. He was never here in Phoenix. They made those in California, hoping to sell them in Arizona, not knowing that he didn't make it here. Another example of an image from this is by Turnbull, the gentleman that had the composite photo with his movie camera. This is one of the Curtiss planes flying at the fairgrounds in Phoenix. And another one that's kind of cool. I love this one with the boys that have hopped up on top of the water tower to get a plane high view as it's going. The car on the bottom here is a white touring car, which is the fastest car in the town at the time. They only had a couple of cars in Phoenix at that point, but they were having races between the airplanes and the cars, between the airplanes and motorcycles, the airplanes and the other. So a great early aviation shot. This one is 1915. This is Catherine Stinson. She was one of the early female pilots. I've actually got an advertising card of her when she was still a Girl Scout. She sold her piano to invest in an airplane so she could become a barnstormer. She did the first airmail in Arizona. She flew from the fairgrounds in Tucson over the city of Tucson, dropped a bag of mail into an empty lot next to the post office, and they postmarked several of them. This is one of two known images that is actually flown. It has the postmark on it from being flown on that first airmail flight. Autos in Arizona. This is kind of an interesting one. This is the Cactus Derby. Cactus Derby was a race from 1908 to 1914 from Los Angeles to Phoenix. It took roughly 28 to 30 hours, depending on which year, because there were no roads, and you had to go across the sand dunes in eastern California and western Arizona. They would actually carry burlap bags, canvas, and hay, and be able to put those down for 20 or 30 feet, drive the car, pick it up, move it again, 20 or 30 feet more, and go. When they hit the Colorado River, there was no bridge, so we put this on a ferry boat, take the ferry boat across the river, and then push off again for the race. In 1914, this is not him, but in 1914, Barney Oldfield won the Indianapolis 500, put his car on a railroad, took it out to California, and won the race from Los Angeles to Phoenix with the same car. This is another one of the aviation or auto-related races at the state fair the following year, but just a nice dynamic shot of the winner getting the checkered flag and waving at the crowd. As far as technology goes, Arizona was a very rough climate, and many people use this as a tool for both developing and marketing new technologies. This is the Fisk Tire Company. They did a travel route from across New Mexico and Arizona. They were bragging they made it across Arizona without having to repair the tires. And they had this Fisk Tire Company advertisement on their cards. There's a number of cards out there that I've found from this series. Another series that's even more unusual. These are on cabinet card mounts, very thick card mounts, but they're postcards on the back. So it's got a postcard back on a thick mount with a photograph on the front with a letterpress on the bottom. These are Packard touring cars. I think it's only one. This is a Packard touring car that Packard put a truck body on to try and sell to the government for the Mexican border war. And on the side of the truck is a embroidered map of southern United States with all the tracking of the trail that they followed as they were going through this. These are a couple of soldiers that stopped at Roosevelt Dam, which we talked about before, and posed there for this. I think I've got 6 of these, I believe. I think there's probably maybe a dozen at most of this in the series. Another kind of unusual one. This is one of the cars that's been developed for rail service. The rail had a much better travel route than the automobiles on the road. The roads were very, very primitive, very difficult. If you needed to carry things, you could convert a car to run on the road. This is a white touring car. This went from Ajo, Arizona, probably to Tucson on the route there. And this is another one, a little bit later variant called the Black Cat that they modified. This one has train wheels on the front so you can drop it down and put regular wheels on it and run on the road as well. So they go back and forth. This one's 1924. So again, a little bit later, but even so, by 24, they were getting very elaborate roads throughout the rest of the United States. And it was still very, very difficult to get around here. Mexican border. This is a Federale, a poser as a Federale in the studio with some studio props. I just thought it was a great image. February 1903 with his badges and a bandolero. This is more of a real one. This is a Mexican troops training with machine guns. They have a variety of different types of machine guns that they were doing. They went from Gatling guns to machine guns roughly during this era, Spam Am War era. And so a lot of the testing was done for the military during the Mexican border war of machine guns mounted on motorcycles, on cars, on airplanes, other things to try and see what they could do. And that sort of established the technology they used in World War I. This is an early bomb, one of the early aerial bombings. This is a bomb that was dropped from a biplane onto the car at Naco, Arizona, which is on the Mexican border again. Final Mexican War related image on this side is Mrs. Villa. This is just after her husband was assassinated, and a shot of her being deposed or making some comments there. Fairly unusual part of the border side. This is the YMHA for the Young Men's Hebrew Association, instead of the Young Men's Christian Association, which was a variant that they had along the Mexican border. This is an interior of the YMHA. Going to the sort of more ethnic side of things, these are buffalo soldiers, wounded buffalo soldiers on the Mexican border, in an ambulance being taken to hospital. Looks like not very serious injuries, but that's the quote. And you can see the stretchers along the side. Another buffalo soldier image. These are buffalo soldiers at Douglas. These are the custom house where they were monitoring the customs. They came out of Fort Huachuca and other areas, but there are a number of buffalo soldier units that were in Arizona during this time and previously. Another buffalo soldier image. I've got a soft spot if I find nice buffalo soldier images. This is a relay race, 1915, along the border at Douglas, with them doing a relay race. And another ethnic image. These are African American marching band, a brass band in Prescott, Arizona, a little bit farther north of Phoenix, and looks like a very formal band. I've not been able to identify, even with the names there, I've not been able to identify the unit or any of the individuals at this point. A final ethnographic image. This is an African American church, the Mount Olive Church, Baptist Church in Douglas, Arizona, with an African American pastor. Again, fairly unusual, both the interior during this time period of the church and the African American connection. On to other social history. Arizona had a lot of tension during that time period from 1900 to 1920 between the unions and the mines and the miners. Governor of Arizona weighed in several times and had the National Guard protect the pro-mine interests against the Wobblies and against the mine workers that were trying to form unions. This is a shot of Cleary, William B. Cleary, who is one of the attorneys that worked with the Wobblies, trying to encourage unionization and protection of the miners and safer working conditions. This is in 1917, part of a series that was done there. This is a loyalty parade where the miners loyal to the mining enterprises were parading between Bisbee, Warren, and Lowell. This is an event that happened on July 17th, 1917, called the Bisbee Deportation. It's a very dark side of our history. They wound up arming a number of individuals with guns who were anti-union. They went door to door in the town from about 3 o'clock in the morning until they rounded up 1,300 people. They marched them to a baseball stadium, held them under armed guard until they could find until the train arrived with cattle cars, loaded them all in the cattle cars and took them out of town, dropped them off in the middle of the desert in New Mexico. There are several photographers did work on this. This one is by Dix, number 22. He advertised a set of 25 cards that he did of the series. Here's another one of the Dix. This is number 34. I'm looking for number 35, number 40, and number 43. So if anybody out there has one, please let me know. The Dix studio had 2 photographers that worked there. They advertised 25 cards. I've actually found more than 25, and I'm working on an article about that. But this is an example of the baseball stadium with the 1,300 people held under armed guard. If you look around, you can see white armbands. This is them actually being loaded onto the cattle cars. And the gentleman in the foreground here, you can see he has the white armband that identifies him as one of the pro-union or pro-mining people, anti-union people, as they're forcing everybody else at gunpoint onto the cattle cars. One of the labor organizers, Frank Little, I believe he's in an earlier photo, but I haven't confirmed that finally yet. But he was one of the organizers in Bisbee deportation. He was able to escape. he went up to Butte, Montana, and was murdered in Butte, Montana as a labor organizer. And this is a memorial card that someone put together there, not Arizona, but Arizona related in part of the story. On to some more ethnographic images. These are Mojave workers. They had little shuttle boats going up and down the Colorado River, delivering hay, feed, and so on. So this is a hay run with a number of the Mojave workers on it. Just a great shot. I love the quasi cowboy, the guy with his gaiters on his wrist there when he's not doing any of the work. He's just sort of the boss man at the time. Here's another one, just one of the many studio portraits. These are a couple of Apache women basket makers with very nice baskets. One in the studio. The woman on the right has the burden basket on her back with, you can see the burden basket here they're used for carrying. This is more of an oil for storage than a flat basket as well. Another running image. This is Native American runners. They would have races on the reservation. I believe this is in St. Michael's area, but I'm still trying to confirm the photographer. This is a curio shop at Rice, Arizona, one of the Indian trading post areas where they had curios that they sold. This is a nice interior. This one is a Pennington Gallery. Wasn't in Arizona, but most of these images are Arizona, Navajo, and Hopi images, but showing a composite card. This is actually a advertising card for sale. So we'd send this card out and you could order the image by number as either a postcard or a large medium format or a large format print. This is the Mexican school for girls in Methodist had a school that they would use to help educate some of the Hispanic community in the Tucson area. And still doing some work on that, finding a little bit more out about this building and the story behind it. But one of the cards was part of a large group that sold at auction. I tried to get it, but was underbidder on that. And then eventually someone who bought it wound up giving it to somebody to list on eBay, and I was able to get a copy there. And the way it always works, as soon as you get one copy that you're trying to find, you find a second one. So a second one surface going to have that too now. On to tourism. This is a petrified forest in northeastern end of Arizona, or quadrant of Arizona, an early Model T, and looking at the petrified forest. These are all petrified logs. So these are, rock petrified logs there. During this time period, a lot of people would take them home as samples or as remembrances. So that a lot of the areas are documented in photographs, but a lot of the petrified wood is now other places. Another all-time favorite. This is Chuckawalla Slim, the rockologist. He was a curio salesman and also proselytizer. He had Jesus Saves on the front of his car with the longhorns. He had this painting on the back. He would have a diorama in the back, and he would sell rocks and jewelry. And this is about 1915. He was still active in the early 1960s. And I bought a piece of jewelry and a rock from him before he retired, and was fascinated to find the earlier images of him. I've got a small Chuckawalla Slim collection of his stuff. Another tourist attraction is this guy, Ernest Hall. He was the brother of the person in Salome, Arizona. He collected woodpecker holes, and woodpecker holes are typically in the saguaro cactus. The cactus would, the birds would eat into the cactus for protection and for moisture, and they would build a nest there, and the cactus would put this secretion around that, which would harden, and that would become a hole that other birds could use over and over again. So as the cactus died, you can see here's the ribs of the cactus with two of these nests in them. People would go out and collect them. So this is Ernest's woodpecker hole collection, which I thought was a great image too. This is Grand Canyon. I just wanted to show a couple of things. There's Cole Brothers and someone else who I don't know exactly who the studio is right now, but they had a whole series of photographs that they made from the same vantage point. And if you sort of work your way through some other images, same rocks, same area, different people, and different poses, but all the same location, subtly different camera, some movements, but kind of fun to look at that sort of a sequence. Another tourist image. This is Gripe, Arizona, which a little bit of everything. A cowboy trading post. They had Gila monsters and wild animals, Coca-Cola sign, Schlitz sign, real wonderful roadside. This is by Burton Fraser or Frasher, depending on who you want to go with for the pronunciation. He was a California photographer out of Pomona. traveled back and forth across the West, made thousands and thousands of images. There are 129,000 images in his collection at Pomona. That was a third of his collection when it broke up that I'm aware of. This one's just sort of a fun one to get close to the end on. Cyanotype, not Arizona, unfortunately, but the cyanotype of a cowgirl. I love the hands up and take your medicine inscription that she has on it. Michael mentioned books. Here are a couple of books that I've done. If you're interested in more information, we can go there. Glad to do other presentations, see what we could do on that side. I'll leave you with a quick ending, and thank you very much for listening, and hope you found something of interest. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was very good. Does anybody have any questions?
I was quite interested in the trolley system that they used to haul the miners back and forth through those through the how far was that, like in miles or something? You
No,
know?
it was, the trolley probably had about maybe a 5.5 mile route with multiple routes along there. There were
Okay.
trolleys in Prescott, Arizona, trolleys in Bisbee, Arizona, trolleys in Phoenix, trolleys in Tucson. Fairly active, and up until World War II, just after World War II, when the trolleys were beaten out of Southern California by the tire companies and the auto companies. Same thing happened in Phoenix and these other areas.
Sure.
I have a question about all the unattributed photographers, the photographers unknown. Do you have any background on that? I'm working on a similar problem with the presentation I'm doing. And like, where did these people come from? Like, were they commissioned, or did they just, did they just kind of shoot on spec and take things around to different stores? Or
for example, the Arizona Souvenir Photo Company in Roosevelt, Arizona, they did their own photos, but they also did photo processing and printing. And if you were wealthy enough or could afford a camera, or in some cases either borrow or rent a camera, I'm assuming, you could make photographs and have them printed and done that way. There are lots of amateur photographs made in postcard format during this time period. Kodak made fairly inexpensive amateur cameras, so it's very difficult to do hard IDs at that level. I've been very lucky and able to find examples of handwriting for many folks. I go back to the World War I military records and other records to find handwriting examples, and I've identified a couple of photographers by the handwriting, and so that's one way to work through and help. But yeah, it's a real crapshoot trying to figure out who and what. But if you get a sequence, sometimes you can find in that sequence, you find some sort of a clue that helps you, work your way back to get an ID. And it's like the Arbuckle things, the Arbuckle 3A, the 3A, you may be able to find some notations there. Sometimes they number things. You find the numbering sequence, you put a number sequence together, then eventually you find one that's got the name of the photographer and the number on it. Then you work your way back again. So it's a lot of serendipity, trying to take advantage of.
Yeah, I have a question. The Model 1 camera, the Kodak's Model 1, and then the 3A, which in effect kind of kicked off a large portion of the photo postcard era. And I'm wondering, what was in between? I'm interested in how people could have cameras like the rodeo photographers who might use a Graflex,
right?
But other people would use the 3A. And I'm wondering if there were, what cameras were around and what was the effect of cameras. It seemed like, in my limited understanding, the 3A was a big kickoff.
It was a big kickoff for that full format size, and the Graflex and the 3A came out about the same time in that format. But there were a lot of other cameras of slightly smaller size, and you see on the earlier Real Photo Postcards, the 19.2, 3, 5 range, that often the image doesn't fill the full postcard. You could use a Kodak box camera, a Brownie camera. As long as you had a negative, you could print it on postcard. So many people you could use any kind of snapshot camera, have it printed on postcard paper, and make a postcard from it.
Well, yeah, but it wouldn't fill the 3.5, 5.5.
Well, unless it's a larger format. I've got examples of larger format images of 5x7 images that somebody's taken a postcard from. Johnson that I mentioned, N.E. Johnson, he actually did panoramics, and his panoramics had so much activity in them, he made photo postcards of sections of the panoramic as postcards. So, I mean, it's wild. It's a bottomless pit trying to, follow these trails and figure out where you go with things. But as you get clusters of images together, that helps you find out more. And groups
Mm.
like this and other people sharing information, sharing things about the cameras, the printing processes, the dating, the stamp box dating, or things like that. That it all adds to the body of knowledge. And then as you find things, depending on where you are in that understanding that knowledge or in your research, you find more and more and more things. And as you go back afterwards, when you find more information, you can reinterpret or find more information back, extract more information from the images.
One last question. It seemed like a lot of your cards were of very specific, limited events. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering how the photographers made a living. I mean, was the postcard just a side thing? Did they do it as a historian in some sense? I mean, it seemed like a very unlikely thing
Yeah.
to photograph, hoping to sell cards.
Yeah, I haven't been able to figure that one out either. There many of the cards, many of the Arizona cards that you find are the Albert types, the litho and the printed cards. I've got a litho and Albert type and printed card collection as well, focusing these on the real photos. The real photos are very, very unusual. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've got people all over. I've been doing it since I used to advertise an antique trader for approvals and things at that level. And I've been to every major institution that I can think of that has a postcard collection. And there are images that you find that are unique, the only image that you've seen. That makes sense. Other times you find a really great image, like the stagecoach in front of the Arizona Souvenir Photo Company. I've got two of those now, and they pop up. I think a lot of these are being done. I've got examples that are done as real photo postcards that were then sent off and made as Albert types or as printed cards.
Mm.
Many of these cards are reproduced later as lithographic or printed cards. Some of them actually fall into having a lot of hand retouching done to them, where they take a photo and then add to them. But that's a whole different category, whole different rabbit hole to go down. But the processing of photos was a business. I've got many shots of small communities that have someone with a Kodak sign in their window.
Mhm.
They were doing photography, and they would take in other people's work and print them and make them available. So what motivated people, how and why? Most of the Arizona cards that I get, just as an example, come from other places because people made them here and sent them to family to document what they were doing there. I've got a great collection of mining material from Bisbee that I bought from Cornwall in England, because they had a lot of Cornish miners and they were communicating with their family and sending things back and forth.
Hmm.
Trying to find documentation other than newspaper advertisements or sales, saying here's what we're doing and how we're selling, has been really tough. The Bisbee deportation, for example, Dick's advertised a 25 card set of the deportation in the papers within days after that event, selling copies of those cards. But was that enough to keep him going? Was this just a sideline for other things? His studio did portraits, did cabinet cards and other work. Whether this was a sidebar for some and a main for others, it's really hard to figure out at this point.
Mm.
For me, anyway.
I think if you're interested in the Kodak cameras, I think the Eastman Kodak Patent Museum was transferred to the Eastman House within the last 15 years. And so you would, if that is where it is, and I believe that's where they took it over, you'll be able to see the sequencing of cameras. It would be, you'd have to make an appointment, but you could probably see it. They're wonderful photographs, and I'm particularly fascinated by those photographs of the people on the ledge above the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
How many of those do you have?
I've gone in spurts a couple of times where I've seemed to find them, or I recognize them and go after them and find them. Every once in a while, some other Grand Canyon people pay more than I feel like paying for them. I don't think they're, hugely expensive cards. I've probably got 15, 20 right now. And every once in a while, when I find some, I'll, add a couple more to the pile.
They're really beautiful. They're just wonderful images.
Almost all of the sort of flapper era. I mean, it's really interesting looking at the clothing and the styles of the folks who are traveling, because they're fairly well to do to be able to spend time in the canyon. And occasionally you find one that's got a camera camera case or holding a camera.
Or even how the people stand on this ledge with the abyss behind them.
Yeah.
And like the one person, she's straddling this crack. I found I found that
So
interesting.
before they put the railing up, that's part of why I find them interesting. Now you can't get within, yeah, many feet of the canyon.
But thank you very much. It's a wonderful, wonderful collection you have
Oh,
there.
thanks.
Wonderful.
Just
Yeah.
an odd little sidebar. As a photographer, I know that from time to time, I'd like to say very rarely, I would print the same negative on the piece of paper that I'd previously exposed because you can't see the image until you develop it.
Yep.
And you say, oh God, I printed it twice on the same piece of paper. It wouldn't seem unlikely that you could print that postcard one way and put the paper aside, then pick it up and put it in, oh, I printed it again. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So it's upside down. Oh, it's kind of cool. I'll sell it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just love that image. It looks like it's composed so carefully for that. It doesn't look like it's just flipped, like he was putting it in a jig and exposing it and then put another one and flipped it upside down and put it in the jig as well. But
Who knows?
yeah, there's no way to tell. I mean, it's all hypothesizing right now, but it's they're great. And one thing that's so wonderful about photo postcards is there's so many variations and so many things that something pops up you've never seen before. Okay, that triggers another set of questions. How do you find out what's going on? Why is it this way? Then you find more cards that way, or you find somebody else that's doing something there. It's a wonderful trail of research that you can do both visually and on the tactile material of the cards themselves.
Have you given any consideration as to what you plan to do with your collection?
Yeah, I've been working on that for a while. I've been following the things that the postcard clubs have been doing on that. My collection is way out of control. I've got 4-drawer file cabinets and many file cabinets and more file cabinets and more file cabinets full of material. Right now I'm in process of cleaning up the cataloging. I've had a day job and not been able to do that. And I've helped other people. I've worked with the Library of Congress on the American Memory Project. I've worked on a variety of other projects and helping other people with their collections, but I haven't had time to work on mine. So I'm trying to get that organized right now. And
I'm willing to take many of them off your hands for as much as $5 a piece if you're interested.
That's
I'll give you
cash.
6.
I was thinking about selling it by the pound as opposed to individually, but if you're yeah, anyway, thank you. Yeah, that where you place collections and what you do. I've got a soapbox on that. Everything is so personality specific. All it takes is one good curator to build a collection and one bad curator to kill it. It's very difficult to find someplace that's stable over time and or that has the resources to deal with it. There are many great postcard collections in institutions that have them in a box, no individual cataloging, sometimes not even a box level catalog, so you can't find them and can't access them. It's a real tough one. History is so underfunded and underappreciated. It's very difficult. So I've got a rescue gene big time. I do a presentation where you show a DNA structure and I go, here's a collecting gene and a rescue gene. Either one's dangerous. If you got both, it's all over. Trying to find a place to park things. So now I do a lot of work. I've done a number of exhibits and ways to get things out. I've worked with the Desert Caballeros Museum on an exhibit. I did an exhibit at the Charlotte Hall Museum in Prescott. We actually modified one of the exhibits and put it in the airport in Phoenix, and we had 1.2 million people through that exhibit. It's probably the largest traffic through a postcard exhibit that I'm aware of. And it was a great way to get people excited. So we were able to get some three-dimensional objects. So we had cameras on tripods and postcard projectors and postcards, and we did some enlargements of postcards as well as the original material. It was a lot of fun. And I've got a exhibit at the Talking Stick Resort. It's a casino that the tribe built. And very lucky on that one. I was able to work with the architect, and they decided they wanted to use the photos as decor. So we did many photographs for that. There's a set of 80 on display in the convention center. Is the good news. The bad news is that in process they changed directors of the casino. He took away the lighting. He took away everything. So but it's far from ideal. Trying to find ways to get things out and get things to share sort of is the next step of where do you place your collection? How do you make it visible? How do you interact with people to get them to appreciate it? And I've also been working with some of the other groups I'm involved with to establish fellowships, research fellowships, to try and get young scholars and young professionals to pay attention to photography. So we've got one, and one is coming, and photo related one at the Library of Congress. One funds 3 fellows a year for stereoscopic research on the stereo collection. The other one, we're going to be at least 2, possibly 3 on photographic history. There's an ephemera fellowship that's now at the Clements Library for people dealing with ephemera, and we've been able to define postcards as ephemera. So that's a target there. Winterthur has a similar one that we've just established that's just getting ready to be advertised. So that's the other part, is how do you leverage your collection by getting other people excited about photography and research and so on, and how do you pass it on? We're the most ephemeral part of our collections. Our collections, my collection has been through probably, images have been through, at least 2 generations, sometimes 3, sometimes 4 for the older stuff. We're just caretakers for this stuff. How do we preserve it, protect it, and pass it on? And then as you're looking for places, how do you make sure that they are an appropriate custodian or curator for the material? It's all part of the milieu that you have to think about.
You speak of a profession I was involved in as a curator of historical documents, primarily manuscripts I worked with most of the time, and archival materials, but I had, it's time to work with graphic material. A collection of old postcards, primarily a bunch of real photo cards that they were given to the New York State Library, and they were valuable enough to be cataloged or made into a guide and listed one by one. But when you have thousands and thousands of cards, you can't sit there and just list one after another unless they're super valuable. And I know I've seen a couple of albums by photographers from upstate New York that I cataloged, made a record of them, made each image in this book, about probably 30 images, that listed all of those, but they were rare, unique, valuable. But most of these postcards, they're printed in such quantities that how can you spend forever cataloging each one of those single items? It's, boggles my mind. Enough to just keep control of their very valuable, unique letters.
Yeah.
Because there's usually only one of those, but 1,000 copies of say, the Arizona State Capitol, if they disappear, one of them gets, you still have plenty of, you might have plenty of them left. It's a printed document versus a very unique, handwritten or real photos are fairly small quantities, and they usually justify more time and energy to, document, my opinion. Because there's not enough of us, and there's just never enough money and never enough personnel and never enough supplies. I spent my whole career in that realm. And I had to, was fortunate enough to get students at the nearby library school to help out, and on many occasions.
Yep, you're hitting it on the head that it's all underfunded. I agree with you on the mass quantities of some postcards. If there are printed cards that there are multiple copies of, item level cataloging, somebody needs to do it, and it needs to be a master set, a master copy somewhere. But it's not a good use of time and value to spend time cataloging things like that. The Real Photo Postcards tend to be more unique and more interesting and more historically important. Or there are some that fall in that category, but there are also some that are, family photos that are unidentified, that don't mean anything, don't do anything now. So that's a curatorial decision, and the director's decision decide how you invest in the cataloging and preservation and control of those. That's one reason I like stereo views, and cased images are unique. It's possible to copy them, but they're unique. The stereo views, there are multiple copies of many of them, but some of them are the attrition is so great that there are only a few copies left. And so trying to do things at that level. Again, I try and fall into I've got this number thing. I love, if it's a number sequence, and I'd like to fill out the numbers and find out, did they follow a temporal track, a geographic track? Is there some relationship between the images? I mean, that whole discussion is an interesting side to do, but that all takes time and effort. If you're lucky enough to have a library school or somebody to work with and we have students, you can leverage that a bit, but that's still never enough. Yeah.
You know, I did use a student with a whole, there were like a bunch of stereographs. It was probably 3 boxes full of them, but they were fairly valuable and unique. And that, I thought that was a good project for a student to work on. It could, you work for a semester, they could spend time going through and listing them and making a guide to it. Then after their work is done, I take their information and create a catalog. The record was in OCLC, and at the time, you know, they make a link to their finding guide that they prepare. That was fairly useful, because those are unique, those stereographs, because I think a lot of them ended up in trash barrels and things like that. And so the quantities pale when compared to postcards. I mean, I don't personally collect them. But they are of value.
You mentioned OCLC. If you're cataloging books, the OCLC is an online catalog, and if you find a book, you can go to OCLC and find someone else has cataloged it. There is no OCLC for stereo views, or no OCLC for postcards. So everybody has to do unique cataloging, which takes even more time, which makes it more difficult to do, which makes it less likely to happen. So yeah, I'm following.
Well, what you do is, if you have in a collection, you get somebody to create a inventory list and maybe write a finding a description. Then you just catalog the whole collection and link it to that finding aid. That's often the best way to do it. That, you know, repositories should make, you know, for the better photographs, make some type of a, you know, guide to them that just tie that to a national, you know, worldwide catalog base, where somebody can go click and pop open all these images, which is very, very useful. That's what they should do with some of your stuff. They should go on some type of put it together in a collection, and then someday they go to the ASU library and they pop it open and see all those images.
Yeah, thanks. Any other comments or questions for us to deal with?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy. That was really good.
Thank you.
Encourage people to
Thank you.
get the book. It's a good book too.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank
Kathy,
you.
see you next month.
Stay
Thanks.
warm, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.